Did you know there's a town in India where people don't speak Hindi, and they don't speak English either? They speak Portuguese, fluently, proudly, and every single day. In this town, the street signs are in Portuguese, the morning prayers in school are in Portuguese, the church choir sings in Portuguese, and even local festivals follow Portuguese traditions. How did a European language survive here for centuries? And why does this community still speak it today? Today, we travel into the heart of one of India's most surprising stories, a place where the rhythm of life beats not in Hindi, not in English, but in the language of Brazil and Portugal. Welcome to India's Portuguese-speaking town. We begin on the western edge of India, where the Arabian Sea kisses the coastline. Colorful houses, old churches, narrow lanes, tiled rooftops, a place that seems to exist between two worlds. You'd expect these streets to echo Hindi or Gujarati conversations. After all, this is India's west coast. Yet here, the first words you hear aren't namaste or kemcho, but bon dia, good morning. A shopkeeper raises his hand and greets a passerby. Bon dia, senor. A group of school children run past, laughing and shouting playful insults, all in Portuguese. Grocery shops with Portuguese signboards, bakeries named Casa do Pão, a pharmacy labeled Farmácia Popular, tiled street names with Portuguese spellings. This isn't a theme park. These aren't tourists. This is the real everyday language of this community. Now, before we go deeper, I want to address something. We created a video about this topic before, and we saw some comments saying that the Portuguese community isn't actually in India. Let me be very clear. This community absolutely exists in India. It's real, it's documented, and today we're going to show you exactly where it is, how it came to be, and why it still thrives. So, how did Portuguese end up here? To understand that, we need to travel back more than 5 centuries to the moment the Indian Ocean was changed forever. In 1498, a Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama became the first European to reach India by sea. His arrival didn't just open a trade route, it opened the door to centuries of cultural exchange, conflict, religion, architecture, and language. Vasco da Gama landed in Calicut, on India's southwestern coast. But it was in Goa, Daman, and Diu where the Portuguese truly established themselves. By 1510, the Portuguese had captured Goa from the Sultan of Bijapur, and it became the capital of Portuguese India. The Portuguese began establishing trading colonies along India's western coast. They built massive stone forts to protect their interests. They constructed elaborate churches that still stand today. They brought priests, musicians, teachers, cooks, stonemasons, soldiers, sailors, entire communities. But unlike other European powers, the Portuguese were different. They didn't just trade, they didn't just build forts, they mixed. They married locals, they converted families, they encouraged intermarriage through official policies. The Portuguese crown even offered incentives for Portuguese men to marry Indian women. This created a unique mixed community known as the Luso-Indians. And with them came the Portuguese language, which slowly drifted from the ports into the homes, into the markets, and into the hearts of generations. Local families began learning Portuguese songs, Catholic prayers, Portuguese-style cuisine. A hybrid culture emerged that became uniquely Indo-Portuguese. Children in these regions grew up hearing, Bom dia, como vai você, onde você vai? For locals living under Portuguese rule, this wasn't a foreign language, it became their community language, their school language, their church language, their emotional language. The Portuguese established schools where instruction was entirely in Portuguese. They set up printing presses that published books in Portuguese. They created legal systems that operated in Portuguese. They built churches where masses were conducted in Portuguese. By the 1600s, Portuguese had become so deeply rooted that even Indians who weren't directly employed by the Portuguese administration spoke it as a primary language. It was the language of commerce, the language of social mobility, the language of cultural prestige. Most Portuguese territories in India eventually adopted English or local Indian languages after independence, but this town refused to let Portuguese fade. Why? 451 years of continuous Portuguese rule. While the British ruled India for about 200 years, the Portuguese ruled here for over 450 years. That's twice as long enough for a language to root itself across families and generations. The Portuguese didn't leave India until 1961. Think about that. When India gained independence from Britain in 1947, the Portuguese territories remained under Portuguese control for another 14 years. By the time India annexed these territories, Portuguese had been spoken here for nearly half a millennium. This town wasn't connected to big Indian cities. There were no major highways linking it to Hindi-speaking regions, no significant migration from the north, no Hindi-speaking population moving in. The community remained relatively isolated, bordered by the sea on one side and dense forests on the other. This geographic barrier meant that the dominant linguistic influences remained Portuguese and local Konkani, with minimal Hindi penetration. Church services, weddings, baptisms, choir songs, all in Portuguese. The church became the strongest cultural protector of the language. Even today, a Sunday morning service might sound exactly like one in Lisbon or Rio. The Catholic Church here maintains strong connections with Portugal and Brazil, regularly hosting visiting priests who conducted services in Portuguese. Religious education was conducted entirely in Portuguese. Children learned catechism in Portuguese, they sang hymns in Portuguese, they confessed in Portuguese. The church wasn't just a place of worship. It was a fortress protecting the language from extinction. Parents spoke Portuguese at home. Grandparents insisted children learn it. Stories, letters, lullabies, all passed on in Portuguese. There was a conscious decision made by each generation to preserve the language. Parents who could speak English or Hindi at work would return home and speak only Portuguese to their children. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate cultural preservation. To this community, Portuguese wasn't just a colonial leftover. It became part of their identity, a badge of cultural uniqueness. It separated them from neighboring communities. It gave them a connection to a wider Lusophone world spanning Portugal, Brazil, Mozambique, Angola, and Macau. Schools established by Portuguese missionaries continued operating well into the 20th century. These schools used Portuguese textbooks, followed Portuguese curriculum, and even celebrated Portuguese national holidays. Students who graduated from these schools were often bilingual or trilingual, speaking Portuguese, Konkani, and sometimes English. But Portuguese remained the language of formal education and cultural sophistication. Let me take you through a typical day in this remarkable town. It's 7 a.m. The sun rises over whitewashed houses with red-tiled roofs. An elderly woman sweeps her doorstep and calls out to her neighbor. Bom dia, Dona Maria. Como passou a noite? Good morning, Mrs. Maria. How did you spend the night? Children in school uniforms walk past, chattering in rapid Portuguese. Two boys argue about a cricket match. Você está errado. Eu vi o jogo. You're wrong. I saw the game. A bread seller pushes his bicycle through the narrow lanes, calling out, Pão frasco, pão quente, fresh bread, hot bread. We enter a local primary school. The bell rings. Students stand as the teacher enters. Bom dia, professora. The morning prayer begins, recited in perfect Portuguese. Pai nosso que estais no céu, santificado seja o vosso nome. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. The attendance register is in Portuguese. The blackboard displays Portuguese grammar lessons. Children recite, Eu sou, tu és, ele é, nós somos, vós sois, eles são. I am, you are, he is, we are, You are, they are. The teacher explains to us, for us, Portuguese is not a foreign language. It is the language of our home, our church, our grandparents. It connects us to our history. When we teach Portuguese to children, we're not teaching them a foreign language, we're teaching them who they are. She shows us textbooks printed in Portugal, storybooks in Portuguese, and student essays written in flowing Portuguese script. A 10-year-old girl reads her essay aloud. Minha avó me conta histórias de quando ela era jovem. My grandmother tells me stories of when she was young.
It's lunchtime. We visit the home of the Fernandez family. 3 generations live under one roof. The grandmother, Dona Helena, prepares lunch in the kitchen. She calls her grandson. Vem aqui, meu filho. Ajuda a vovó. Come here, my son. Help grandmother. The family sits together around a wooden table that's been in the family for over 100 years. The entire conversation flows in Portuguese. Como foi a escola hoje? How was school today? Foi boa, vovô. Aprendemos sobre história de Portugal. It was good, grandmother. We learned about the history of Portugal. Photographs on the wall show ancestors from the 1800s wearing Indo-Portuguese clothing, European-style jackets with Indian dhoti-style pants, women in Portuguese-influenced saris with lace veils. Dona Helena shows us a wooden chest containing letters written by her great-grandmother in the 1870s, all in Portuguese cursive. She reads one aloud, her voice thick with emotion. Minha querida filha, as chuvas chegaram e a colheita será boa. My dear daughter, the rains have come and the harvest will be good. These letters, she says, are my connection to my ancestors. When I read them in Portuguese, I can hear my great-grandmother's voice. The afternoon market buzzes with activity. Fishermen display their morning catch. Women haggle over vegetables. And everything happens in Portuguese. Quanto custa este peixe? How much is this fish? 50 rupias, senhora. 50 rupees, madam. Muito caro, dou-lhe 40. Too expensive, I'll give you 40. A baker arranges fresh bread in his stall. The signs are in Portuguese. Pão, 15 rupees. Bolinhos, 10 rupees. The smell of baking fills the air. Not chapati or naan, but European-style bread baked in clay ovens. An elderly man sits outside a cafe reading a Portuguese newspaper. Yes, there's still a weekly Portuguese newspaper published here, covering local news, church events, and community announcements. The Church of Our Lady of Immaculate Conception stands at the town center, its white Baroque facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Inside, a choir is practicing for Sunday Mass. Their voices echo through the vaulted ceiling, singing harmonies in Portuguese that sound like they could be coming from a church in Lisbon or Salvador. Ave Maria, cheia de graça, o Senhor é convosco. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Father Rodriguez, the parish priest, speaks to us. We still conduct masses in Portuguese for older members who feel closest to God in that language. My grandmother, who passed away last year at 94, never learned Hindi. She lived her entire life speaking only Portuguese and Konkani. When she prayed, it was always in Portuguese. To take that away from her would have been to take away her connection to God. He shows us the church registry, filled with entries in Portuguese dating back to 1735. Baptisms, marriages, deaths, all recorded in elegant Portuguese script. Every Sunday, he continues, we have 2 masses, one in Portuguese at 8 a.m. for the older generation, and one in English at 10 a.m. for the younger people. But even in the English Mass, we sing some hymns in Portuguese because that's when the church feels most alive. It's June, and the town celebrates the feast of São João, St. John. This isn't just a religious festival, it's a full-blown cultural carnival. Drum beats echo through the streets. Decorated umbrellas swing above dancers. People wear crowns made of flowers and colorful paper. Young men jump into wells and rivers, a tradition brought from Portugal centuries ago. People shout, "Viva São João! Long live St. John!" The festival combines Portuguese traditions with Indian flavors. There's traditional Portuguese folk dancing, the corrijinho, performed by young people in traditional dress, but the music has been infused with Indian rhythms, creating something entirely unique. Food stalls sell sanas, sorpotel, and bebinca. A man sells cashew feni, a local liquor with Portuguese influence. A young woman named Maria explains, "This festival is who we are. It's Portuguese, yes, but it's also Indian. We're not trying to be European. We're not trying to reject our Indian identity. We're both. We're Indo-Portuguese, and we're proud of it." Language isn't the only thing that survived. The culture here is a beautiful blend you won't find anywhere else in India. Walk through these streets and you'll see architectural style that's distinctly hybrid. Brightly colored houses, yellows, blues, pinks, greens, painted in shades rarely seen in traditional Indian architecture. Catholic churches with Portuguese Baroque design, their white facades adorned with intricate carvings, balconies with European ironwork overlooking narrow cobblestone streets. The most stunning feature is the azulejo tiles, blue and white ceramic tiles painted with intricate patterns and religious scenes, imported from Portugal or locally made by Portuguese artisans. These tiles cover the facades of churches, homes, and public buildings. Inside the homes, you'll find another layer of cultural fusion. High ceilings with wooden beams in Portuguese style, but floors made of Indian red oxide. Furniture that combines European carpentry with Indian wood like teak and rosewood. Living rooms with Christian altars decorated with Indian flowers and incense. The food here is an adventure in cultural fusion. This community created a cuisine that's neither fully Portuguese nor fully Indian. It's Luso-Indian. Vindaloo, which people around the world know as an Indian curry, actually comes from the Portuguese dish carne de vinha balhos, meat in wine and garlic. The Portuguese brought this recipe to India, and over centuries it evolved with local spices to become the vindaloo we know today. Sorpotel is another Portuguese origin dish, a spicy curry made with pork and offal, influenced by Portuguese sarapatel. Bebinca, that 16-layer coconut cake, requires patience and skill passed down through generations. Then there's pão, Portuguese-style bread baked in clay ovens, sold fresh every morning. It's not naan or roti or chapati. It's crusty European bread that's been baked in India for 500 years. Balchao is a tangy pickle made with shrimp or fish using Portuguese vinegar preservation techniques. Cafreal is a green chicken curry with Portuguese origins. Shakuti, recheado, ambotik, each dish tells a story of cultural exchange. And of course, there's the famous cashew feni, a liquor distilled from cashew apples, a technique brought by the Portuguese and perfected locally over centuries. The musical tradition here is equally unique. The mando is a musical form that emerged from this cultural blend. It combines Portuguese folk melodies with Konkani lyrics and Indian rhythms. Guitars are the instrument of choice, not sitars or tablas. Young people learn to play Portuguese-style guitar, performing fado-influenced songs at community gatherings. The dolpud is another traditional form, a lively, rhythmic songs performed at festivals and weddings, accompanied by the gumot, a clay pot drum, violin, and guitar. At weddings, you might see a dance called the dekni, women in traditional dress performing graceful movements that combine Portuguese folk dance with Indian gestures. Open the local phone directory and you'll see names that could belong in Lisbon: Fernandez, Rodriguez, Pereira, de Souza, Coelho, Diaz, Lobo, Rebelo, Sequeira. These aren't stage names or adopted names. They're family names passed down for generations. Birth certificates, marriage certificates, property deeds all carry these Portuguese surnames. But here's where it gets interesting. These families have Portuguese last names, but their first names often reflect both cultures. You'll meet someone named João Fernandes or Maria Rodrigues, but also someone named Ashok de Souza or Priya Pereira. People here carry Indian passports, vote in Indian elections, celebrate Indian independence. They're fully Indian, but they also maintain this Portuguese cultural identity. They're not conflicted about it. They've found a way to be authentically both. But things are changing, and not everyone is optimistic about the future. Younger people move to bigger cities like Mumbai, Pune, and Bangalore for jobs. In these cities, Hindi and English dominate. Portuguese becomes a language of nostalgia, something spoken during phone calls home, but not in daily life. Modern education prioritizes English. Schools still teach Portuguese, but it's often treated as a third language, given less importance than Hindi and Hindi. Children who grow up watching Bollywood films and English cartoons don't feel the same emotional connection to Portuguese that their grandparents did.
Social media, smartphones, streaming services, all primarily in English and Hindi. The digital world has little space for Portuguese content created by and for this small community. Antonio Pereira, 78 years old, sits on his veranda and expresses his concern. When I was young, every person in this town spoke Portuguese. My friends, my neighbors, the shopkeeper, the fisherman, everyone. Now, maybe only half do. My grandchildren understand Portuguese when I speak to it, but they reply in English. They watch English movies, they listen to English songs. When I'm gone, who will speak to them in Portuguese? A local teacher, Juliana Fernandes, adds, "We're fighting a losing battle. Parents want their children to succeed, and success in modern India means English proficiency. Portuguese doesn't get you a job at an IT company or a multinational corporation. I understand why parents prioritize English, but it breaks my heart to see our language fading." The statistics are sobering. In 1961, when India annexed these Portuguese territories, nearly 100% of this community spoke Portuguese fluently. Today, estimates suggest only 50 to 60% of people under 40 can speak conversational Portuguese, and that number drops to 30 to 40% for those under 25. Languages don't die overnight. They die slowly, when fewer and fewer tongues speak them, when grandchildren can no longer speak to grandparents in their mother tongue, when songs are forgotten, when stories can't be passed down. But this community refuses to give up without a fight. In a classroom at the community center, a group of adults sits at desks, notebooks open, practicing Portuguese grammar. These aren't school children, they're adults in their 30s and 40s, some of whom grew up without learning Portuguese, now trying to reclaim their heritage. I can understand when my parents speak Portuguese, but I never learned to speak it properly. I regret that. Now I have children of my own, and I want them to know this language, so I'm learning it again. Cultural societies have sprung up with the mission of preserving Portuguese language and culture. The Fundación Oriente India supports Portuguese language education. The Instituto Camões, Portugal's international cultural organization, has established a presence here, offering scholarships for young people to study in Portugal. Local libraries are digitizing old Portuguese documents, letters, and newspapers before they deteriorate. Oral history projects record elderly speakers telling stories in Portuguese, preserving not just the language, but the unique accent and expressions that have evolved here over centuries. The church continues to play a crucial role. Youth groups organize Portuguese language camps where children spend a week immersed in Portuguese, speaking, singing, acting in plays, all in Portuguese. Father Rodrigues explains their approach. We're not teaching Portuguese as a dead language or a museum piece. We're teaching it as a living, vibrant language that connects you to millions of speakers around the world. We emphasize that if you speak Portuguese, you can communicate with people in Brazil, Portugal, Angola, Mozambique, over 250 million people worldwide. The Portuguese government has taken notice. They funded Portuguese language programs, sent teachers from Portugal to work here, and offered scholarships for local students to attend Portuguese universities. This isn't just charity. Portugal sees this community as part of the global Lusophone world, a bridge between Portugal and India. Tourism is also playing an unexpected role. Foreign tourists, particularly from Brazil and Portugal, visit specifically to experience this unique Lusophone pocket of India. This brings economic benefits and raises awareness of the community's cultural value. Young creators on social media are making content in Portuguese with English subtitles, introducing the language and culture to wider audiences. Cooking channels showcase Indo-Portuguese recipes. Travel vloggers document the architecture and festivals. Musicians post traditional songs with modern arrangements. A 19-year-old named Rita Coelho runs a YouTube channel where she teaches conversational Portuguese. I want to show young people that Portuguese isn't boring or old-fashioned. It's cool. It connects us to global culture. When I post videos in Portuguese, I get comments from people in Brazil, Portugal, Africa. They're amazed that we speak Portuguese in India. It makes me proud.
Local schools have strengthened their Portuguese programs. Instead of treating it as an optional third language, some schools now require Portuguese proficiency for graduation. They've partnered with schools in Brazil for student exchange programs, giving young people a chance to experience Lusophone culture firsthand. Music festivals celebrating Indo-Portuguese culture attract thousands of visitors. The annual Festival de Música Portuguesa features traditional mando and dulpode performances alongside modern Portuguese rock and Brazilian samba. Against all odds, something is shifting. The language isn't just surviving. In some ways, it's experiencing a renaissance. A new generation is choosing to rediscover what their ancestors protected for centuries. We speak to young people about what Portuguese means to them. Catarina Fernandez, 16. My friends at school think it's exotic that I speak Portuguese. They ask me to teach them phrases. It makes me feel special, like I have this secret key to a whole different world. Miguel Rodriguez, 22, studying in Mumbai. When I'm in Mumbai, surrounded by Hindi and Marathi and English, and I call my grandmother and speak Portuguese with her, it grounds me. It reminds me where I come from. I don't want to lose that. Ana Pereira, 14. I want to visit Brazil someday. I watch Brazilian TV shows with my mom, and I understand most of it. It's amazing that I can connect with people on the other side of the world because my ancestors preserved this language. Roberto de Sousa, 27, a software engineer. People ask me why I bother learning Portuguese when I already speak English and Hindi. I tell them it's not about practicality. It's about identity. It's about honoring my grandparents who fought to keep this language alive. It's about being part of something rare and precious. These young people aren't learning Portuguese because they have to. They're learning it because they want to. That desire, that voluntary choice to preserve heritage, is perhaps the most powerful force for language survival. This story isn't just about one town or one language. It's about what happens when cultures collide and merge instead of destroying each other. India is often described as a land of diversity, but this community represents a type of diversity that's rarely discussed, the legacy of centuries of cultural exchange. For better or worse, the Portuguese colonized India, and colonization brought violence, exploitation, and suffering. But it also brought cultural exchange. The people who live in this town today aren't victims or villains.
They're descendants of people who navigated these complex forces and created a unique cultural identity. This community has managed to do something remarkable. They've kept alive a European language in Asia for over 500 years, long after the colonial power left. They've done this not through force or government mandate, but through family transmission, cultural pride, and institutional support from the church and schools. In a world where languages are disappearing at an alarming rate, linguists estimate that one language dies every 2 weeks. This community's success in preserving Portuguese offers lessons. Language survives when it's tied to identity, not just utility. Portuguese doesn't help these people get jobs, but it helps them know who they are. Language survives when institutions support it. The church, the schools, the cultural organizations, they all play crucial roles. Language survives when it's passed down in families, when grandparents insist that grandchildren learn, when parents make the conscious choice to speak it at home. And perhaps most importantly, language survives when the community sees value in it, not economic value, but cultural and emotional value. This Indian Portuguese-speaking community isn't entirely unique in the world. There are other pockets of Portuguese speakers in unexpected places. In Malacca, Malaysia, a small Kristang community speaks a Portuguese Creole. In Sri Lanka, there are Portuguese burghers who maintain Portuguese surnames and some traditions, though few speak the language. In Indonesia, particularly in Flores, Portuguese influence remains from centuries ago. But this Indian community is remarkable for maintaining Portuguese as a full, living language, rather than a Creole or a ceremonial language. People here can read Portuguese literature, watch Portuguese TV, communicate with Portuguese speakers worldwide, something that's rare among isolated linguistic communities. In contrast, let's consider what happened in Macau. The Portuguese ruled Macau from 1557 to 1999, even longer than these Indian territories. Yet today, only about 0.6% of Macau's population speaks Portuguese. The language didn't survive in daily life the way it has in this Indian town. Why? Probably because in Macau, the Portuguese community remained small and separate. They didn't intermarry extensively. They didn't create a large mixed community. When the Portuguese left, the language left with them. But in India, the Portuguese intermarried, converted locals, and created a community that was neither fully Portuguese nor fully Indian. They were Luso-Indian. And that hybrid identity needed a hybrid expression, which the Portuguese language provided. So what does the future hold for Portuguese in India? Linguists are cautiously hopeful. Dr. José Pereira da Silva, a professor who studies Indo-Portuguese culture, believes the language can survive. The key is making it relevant to young people. Portuguese isn't just a colonial relic, it's a gateway to a global community. Brazil is an economic powerhouse. Portugal is part of the European Union. Africa has 5 Portuguese-speaking countries with growing economies: Mozambique, Angola, Cape Verde. These are countries where knowing Portuguese creates opportunities. He continues, if we frame Portuguese as a language of opportunity rather than just heritage, young people will embrace it. Imagine a young person from this town who speaks Portuguese, English, and Hindi fluently. They're positioned to work in international companies, in diplomacy, in trade. That's powerful. The community is also leveraging technology. Language learning apps are being developed specifically for this community's dialect of Portuguese, which has unique expressions and words borrowed from Konkani and Marathi. Schools are incorporating multimedia approaches, watching Portuguese films, connecting with students in Brazil via video calls, using Portuguese social media. The Portuguese government's continued interest is crucial. As long as Portugal views this community as part of the Lusophone world and invests in its preservation, there's hope. Tourism can play a role too. As more travelers seek authentic, unusual experiences, this town's unique cultural identity becomes an asset. Cultural tourism can provide economic incentives for language preservation. But perhaps the most important factor is whether the next generation chooses to embrace their heritage. Will Rita continue her YouTube channel? Will Miguel teach Portuguese to his children? Will Ana actually visit Brazil? The answer depends on whether they see Portuguese not as a burden or an obligation, but as a gift, a connection to history, to culture, to a global community. As the sun sets on the town, children shout Portuguese words while playing in the streets. Elderly couples sit outside their homes, conversing in the language they've spoken all their lives. The church bells ring, the same bells that have rung for centuries, calling the faithful to evening mass. In the golden light of sunset, the town looks almost frozen in time. But it's not. It's very much alive, changing, adapting, struggling with modernity while trying to preserve tradition. This town exists at the intersection of history and hope. History brought Portuguese here through colonization, conversion, and cultural exchange. Hope keeps it alive as communities choose to preserve it against the overwhelming tide of globalization. In a world where languages vanish every year, where cultural homogenization seems inevitable, this town stands as a reminder that history lives when people choose to protect it. Language is more than words. It's memory, identity, connection. When an elderly grandmother speaks Portuguese to her grandchild, she's not just teaching vocabulary, she's passing down centuries of history, generations of struggles and triumphs, a unique way of seeing the world.
India is a land of contradictions and surprises, a country with 22 official languages and hundreds of dialects, a place where ancient traditions exist alongside cutting-edge technology, where you can find Himalayan monasteries and tropical beaches, Silicon Valley-style tech hubs in villages without electricity. But a town where nobody speaks Hindi or English, where everyone speaks Portuguese? That's a story few people ever expected. This isn't just about language preservation. It's about cultural resilience. It's about communities making choices about who they want to be. It's about the beautiful, complicated legacy of history. And it's about the simple truth that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are found in the most unexpected places. So now I want to hear from you. Should this community's language be preserved? Is it important to maintain linguistic diversity, even when it's economically impractical? Would you ever visit this unique corner of India? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories the world has forgotten. And if you know anyone interested in linguistics, cultural preservation, or unusual travel destinations, share this video with them. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep discovering the amazing diversity our world has to offer. Até logo. That's Portuguese for see you later.